Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. I never imagined that one ordinary Saturday morning would change how I saw my son and myself forever. It started so quietly, so simply, like any other day. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, sunlight pushed gently through the curtains, and the house hummed with that soft weekend stillness I always loved. My son, Daniel, had come over early, saying he wanted to talk. Those words alone put a small knot in my stomach. When your child says that, especially when they're grown, you can't help but worry. Daniel was 32 now. A quiet man, thoughtful, maybe too thoughtful for his own good. After his father passed away 5 years ago, he'd carried a kind of silent weight on his shoulders. I could see it in his eyes every time he smiled, that effort to hide something. He sat at the table with a cup of tea I'd made for him, his fingers wrapped around it but not drinking. I noticed how his hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from something inside. I'd seen that same trembling years ago, when he was a boy trying to tell me he'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. "Mom," he said, clearing his throat. "Can I ask you something strange?" I laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. "You've asked strange things your whole life, Daniel. Go ahead." But he didn't smile. He looked down, his voice low. "I need your help with something. Something personal." And I didn't know who else to turn to. That caught me off guard. Daniel had always been independent. Even after his father's death, he rarely asked me for anything. I leaned forward, my heart suddenly uneasy. "What is it, honey?" He hesitated. "It's about Dad." The room seemed to shrink in that moment. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall grew louder, sharper. I hadn't heard his father's name said aloud in weeks, maybe months. It still carried a sting. Daniel took a deep breath and continued. "You remember how he used to record everything on those old cassette tapes? His thoughts, his plans, stories for me when I was a kid?" I nodded. I remembered too well. My husband, Michael, had always been sentimental, maybe a little obsessed with leaving pieces of himself behind. After he passed, those tapes became too painful for me to listen to. I boxed them up and stored them in the attic, thinking I'd face them one day. Daniel looked up, his eyes glistening. "I found one. It wasn't labeled. I thought it was just another one of his notes." "But, Mom, he was talking to you. It was recorded the night before he went into the hospital." My breath caught. My hands gripped the edge of the table. I didn't even remember him recording anything that week. "He left me a message," I whispered. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. I listened to part of it. I couldn't finish it. I thought you should hear it first." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, my chest heavy with a mix of fear and longing. For years, I'd imagined hearing his voice again, but always in dreams, never like this. "Where is it?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn cassette. The kind that used to rattle around in car dashboards decades ago. He set it on the table between us like it was something sacred. For a while, neither of us spoke. The weight of that little tape seemed enormous. I stared at it, afraid that pressing play would break something inside me I had carefully rebuilt over the years. Finally, I looked at Daniel. "Do you want to listen together?" He shook his head softly. "I think you should listen alone first. Then, maybe we can talk." He stood, walked over to me, and kissed the top of my head. "I'll wait outside," he said. His voice cracked just slightly before he turned away. When the door closed behind him, the silence was deafening. I picked up the cassette, holding it carefully in my hands. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. I dug out the old tape player from the drawer, the same one Michael used to use. The plastic was scratched, the buttons stiff. I slid the tape in and pressed play. There was a soft click, then static. For a few seconds, nothing. Then his voice, older, rougher, but still unmistakably his. "Mary," he began, quietly. "If you're hearing this, I guess I didn't make it home." My breath caught. My hands trembled as his words filled the kitchen. His tone was calm, almost peaceful. "I don't want this to be sad. I wanted to tell you a few things before I go. Things I didn't say out loud enough. Tears blurred my vision, and I pressed a napkin against my face, afraid to breathe too loudly. He went on, talking about Daniel, about our life together, about the mornings we'd spent laughing over burnt toast and spilled coffee. Then his voice grew softer. I left something behind, he said. A letter. Not for Daniel, not for anyone else, just for you. It's hidden in the place where we first met. I froze. Where we first met, that would be the old park on Maple Street. The bench near the fountain. I hadn't been there in decades. The tape clicked off suddenly, the end of the recording. I sat there, shaking, my hand still clutching the player. I didn't even realize Daniel had come back inside until I heard his voice. You heard it, didn't you? I nodded slowly, trying to steady my breathing. He left me a letter. Daniel's face softened. Then I think we need to find it. For the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Hope. I looked down at the tape, then back at him. The sunlight had shifted through the curtains, spilling across the table, and in that light, I felt something stirring in me, a feeling I hadn't known I missed. I guess we're going to the park, I said quietly. And just like that, something inside me, something long buried, began to wake up. That was the moment I realized my son hadn't just asked me to listen to an old recording. He had asked me to face the part of myself I'd been avoiding for years. The drive to the park that afternoon was quieter than I expected. The sky was grey, the kind of grey that feels heavy and thoughtful, and the air carried that cool crispness that hinted at rain. Daniel drove while I sat in the passenger seat, the old cassette resting on my lap like a relic from another lifetime. Neither of us said much. There was something sacred about the silence. As the car rolled down Maple Street, my chest tightened. That place held more memories than I could count. It was where I met Michael 40 years ago, under the shade of that big oak tree that leaned toward the fountain. I could still remember the way the sunlight danced across the water that day, the way he smiled at me, easy, genuine, like he already knew I'd be part of his life. Now, all these years later, I was heading back there with our grown son, chasing a letter that might not even exist. When we parked, Daniel glanced at me before opening his door. You okay? I'm not sure, I admitted. But I need to do this. We stepped out into the soft hum of the park. The same iron gates were still there, rusted now and creaking as they opened. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, and somewhere, a dog barked. It all felt strangely alive, like time hadn't stopped here, even if it had for me. We walked along the old path, leaves crunching beneath our feet. The trees arched overhead like a tunnel of memory, and I found myself slowing down, looking around as if expecting Michael to step out from behind one of them, grinning like he used to. Then I saw it, the fountain. Still standing, though the water didn't flow anymore. The stone was cracked, moss spreading along its base. The bench was there too, faded, its paint peeling. That's the spot, I said quietly. Daniel followed my gaze. Where you met Dad? I nodded. He spilled his coffee right there, I said with a small laugh. He was so nervous he didn't even notice me laughing until I handed him a napkin. Daniel smiled faintly, but his expression turned serious again. Do you think the letter could still be here after all this time? I don't know, I said. But your father was deliberate. If he said it was here, maybe he made sure it would last. We knelt near the bench, brushing away dirt and leaves. Daniel lifted the wooden slats carefully, one by one. For a while, there was nothing, just the rustle of the wind and the sound of our breathing. Then, as he pried at the edge of the bench frame, I heard a small metallic sound. He froze, looked at me, then reached in and pulled something out. It was a small metal box, rusted but intact. My heart leapt into my throat. Mom, Daniel whispered. It's real. I took it from him, my fingers trembling. The box was cold, heavier than I expected. I could almost feel Michael's presence in it, his meticulous care, his sense of meaning in every little thing. We sat side by side on the old bench as I opened it. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed piece of cloth, was a folded envelope. My name was written on it in his familiar handwriting, still strong, still steady. Mary. I traced the letters with my thumb before opening it. Inside was a single page, written on the same paper he used to keep in his desk. My love, it began. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say everything I wanted. I know how strong you are, and I know you'll keep going. But I also know you, And you'll hide your pain behind that quiet smile. Don't do that. Don't let the memories fade because they hurt. Let them stay, because they're proof that we lived, that we loved, that we were real. Tears blurred my vision. I could barely keep reading. Daniel placed his hand gently over mine, steadying me. The letter continued. Promise me something. When Daniel is ready, help him see that life doesn't stop when we lose someone. It bends, it changes, but it keeps moving. Don't let him carry my shadow. Let him carry the light. By the time I reached the end, I was shaking. Michael had always known exactly what to say, even from beyond time. Daniel leaned closer. Mom, he wrote that for both of us. I nodded, unable to speak. The wind brushed through the trees, scattering leaves across our feet, and for a moment, it felt like Michael was there, not haunting us, but guiding us. We sat there for a long time, watching the park fill with afternoon light. I looked at my son, this man who once fit in my arms, now sitting beside me, carrying his father's eyes and his quiet strength. Daniel, I said softly, thank you for bringing me here. He turned to me, his face calm but wet with tears. I just thought, maybe we both needed to hear him again. I smiled through my tears. You were right. When we finally stood to leave, I tucked the letter close to my heart. I felt lighter somehow, like something inside me had shifted, healed just a little. As we walked back to the car, Daniel glanced at me and said, Mom, there's one more thing. I looked at him, curious. What is it? He hesitated, then said quietly, I think Dad left something else. The tape. It wasn't the only one. There's another one. It was hidden in his old workshop. I stopped walking. Another tape. Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah. And from what little I heard, it's not just a message. It's something he wanted us to finish. The words hung in the air between us like a promise or maybe a challenge, and in that moment, I knew our journey wasn't over. I barely slept that night. The letter lay folded on my nightstand, lit softly by the glow of the lamp I couldn't bring myself to turn off. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Michael's voice again, that calm, steady tone that somehow made everything feel right, even when it wasn't. But the words that lingered most weren't from the letter. They were Daniel's. There's another tape. Morning came grey and still. I stood by the kitchen window, coffee cooling in my hands, watching the mist drift lazily through the backyard. Daniel arrived just after sunrise, a small toolbox in one hand and a determined look on his face. You didn't have to come this early, I said, though truthfully, I was grateful he had. I couldn't wait, he said. If there's something else Dad wanted us to find, I want to know. We went out to the garage, or as Michael always called it, the workshop. It hadn't changed much since the day he left it. His tools were still lined neatly along the pegboard, labeled in his handwriting. The faint scent of sawdust still clung to the air. Time had frozen here. Daniel ran his fingers across the workbench, brushing away a thin layer of dust. He used to sit here for hours, he murmured. Even after dinner, remember? I nodded, my throat tightening. He said it helped him think. Daniel crouched down to check the drawers, pulling them open one by one. Nails, bolts, old sandpaper, nothing unusual. Then he paused. Mom, he said quietly, look. Behind the lowest drawer, a small wooden panel was slightly loose. I remembered Michael building that cabinet himself years ago. I'd never noticed that hidden space before. Daniel pried the panel open gently. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was another cassette, this one newer, labeled in Michael's familiar handwriting, for later. The sight of it made my knees weak. I reached out and touched it, my hand trembling. He really planned this, I whispered. All of it. Daniel found the old tape player on the shelf and dusted it off. We plugged it in, sitting on the cold cement floor side by side, the morning light filtering through the high window. When he pressed play, there was that same soft click, then static, then Michael's voice again, clearer this time, stronger. If you're hearing this, he began, then you've already found the first tape. Good. That means you've started to let the past breathe again. I felt tears sting my eyes. Daniel's hands tightened around his knees. I left you both something, Michael continued. Not money, not things, something I hope will remind you who we were. You'll find an old key in my fishing box. It opens the cabin at Miller Lake. Go there together. You'll understand once you do. The tape clicked off suddenly, ending as abruptly as it began. Daniel and I stared at each other in silence. I could almost hear my heartbeat echoing off the garage walls. "The cabin," Daniel said finally. He hadn't been there in years. "It was his escape," I murmured. "Every summer we'd go for a weekend, fishing, reading, talking about nothing and everything. After he got sick, we stopped going. I couldn't bring myself to go back." Daniel stood and opened the old fishing box that sat in the corner, covered with dust and spiderwebs. Inside, among tangled lines and a rusted reel, lay a single brass key. Its metal was tarnished but solid, heavy in Daniel's palm. He looked at me, his expression mixed with awe and uncertainty. "Do you want to go?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted toward the open door of the garage, where the morning light spilled in. Beyond it, the world felt alive again, unpredictable, full of the kind of meaning I thought I'd lost. "Yes," I said finally. "If your father wanted us there, we're going." The drive to Miller Lake took nearly 2 hours. The landscape changed from suburbs to winding country roads lined with tall pines and wildflowers. Neither of us talked much, but the silence felt different this time, peaceful, not heavy. When we arrived, the cabin looked smaller than I remembered. The wood had darkened with age, the porch sagged slightly, but it still stood proud against the backdrop of the lake. The water shimmered under the gray sky, rippling gently against the shore. Daniel pushed open the door. The hinges groaned, and the faint scent of cedar and old paper rushed out, exactly as it had smelled decades ago. Dust motes floated in the light as we stepped inside. The cabin was just as we'd left it, a table by the window, 2 chairs, the stone fireplace still stacked with half-burned logs. And on that table, resting neatly in the center, was an envelope. Daniel looked at me, wide-eyed. "Mom," I approached slowly, heart pounding. The envelope was addressed the same way as before, "Mary." But underneath, smaller, almost as an afterthought, were 2 more words, and Daniel my fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was another letter, longer this time, written in Michael's careful script. "If you've come this far," it began, "then I know you're ready. The cabin was always our place of peace, and I wanted it to stay that way. But there's one more thing I need to ask of you both. It's simple, but it's everything. Forgive me." I stopped reading, my chest tightening. Daniel leaned closer, his brow furrowed. Michael's words continued. "There are things I never told you, choices I made that I thought were right at the time, but I see now they weren't. You'll find a box under the floorboards near the fireplace. Inside are the letters I never sent. Read them, then decide what you need to forgive." I looked up at Daniel, speechless. He nodded slowly. "Then let's find it." We moved the rug aside and pried up one of the loose boards. Sure enough, there was a small wooden box beneath. Dusty, but untouched. When I opened it, there were several letters inside, neatly stacked and tied with twine. My hands shook as I lifted the first one. The date on it was from years before Michael got sick, years before either of us knew what was coming. "Mom," Daniel said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder, "maybe we should read them together." I met his eyes, those same deep brown eyes that mirrored his father's, and nodded. Yes. The rain began to fall softly outside, tapping against the roof. We sat together by the fireplace, ready to uncover the truth Michael had kept from us, and deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about finding a way to heal, together. The rain didn't stop that night. It fell in soft sheets against the cabin roof, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo every heartbeat, every breath. Daniel and I sat side by side on the worn floorboards, surrounded by the past, letters tied with twine, Michael's handwriting flowing across yellowed paper like whispers from another life. We read the first letter together. It was dated more than 20 years ago, written in Michael's unmistakable script. "My dearest Mary," it began, "there's something I never told you, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't know how. Before we met, there was a time I almost gave up on everything. I made choices I wasn't proud of. I left things unfinished. You gave me the courage to start again, but part of me always feared you'd see the man I was before you." I stopped reading and pressed my hand over my mouth. Daniel looked at me carefully, as if afraid to speak. "It's not a confession," I said softly. "It's a man remembering his failures." We kept reading. The next letter was addressed to Daniel, though he couldn't have been more than 10 years old when it was written. "My boy," it said, "if you ever doubt who you are, remember this: you don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to try. The world will break you, but it's how you rebuild that defines you. I wasn't always the father I wanted to be, but every moment with you made me want to be better. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The sound of the rain filled the silence between us. Mom, he whispered, I don't think these letters were about secrets. I think they were about peace. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. He knew we'd need it someday. We opened the final letter together. The ink was slightly faded, but his words were clear to the two of you. If you've made it here, it means you've faced the hardest part, remembering. The world moves fast, and grief makes us forget to live. Don't let my absence become your prison. Go back to the lake in the morning. Watch the sunrise together. I built something there for you both, not to mourn me, but to remind you that love doesn't end. It changes shape, but it never disappears. When I finished reading, I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Daniel reached over and pulled me into his arms. For the first time since Michael died, I didn't resist. I let myself cry. Not the quiet tears I used to shed at night when no one was around, but deep, shaking sobs that had been waiting years to escape. We stayed like that for a long time. Outside, the storm began to fade. The sound of thunder drifted farther away, leaving behind only the soft patter of rain. Later, when the fire burned low and exhaustion began to settle in, I looked over at my son, this man who had once been my little boy, now sitting with the same quiet strength his father once carried. You know, I said softly, when you came to me with that first tape, I thought it would just bring back pain. But it brought him back instead, in the best way possible. Daniel smiled faintly. He always found a way to keep teaching us, even after he was gone. I nodded. He did. We fell asleep there by the fire, surrounded by the letters, the scent of old cedar, and the faint warmth of a memory that still lived in the walls of that cabin. When dawn came, the lake shimmered silver beneath a pale sky. Mist hovered over the water, moving gently with the breeze. Daniel brewed coffee on the old stove, the same way Michael used to, while I stood by the window, holding the last letter against my chest. Ready? Daniel asked. I turned and smiled. Let's see what he left for us. We walked down to the water's edge. The ground was soft, the air cool and clean. A small wooden dock stretched out into the lake, newly built, sturdier than I remembered. At the end of it, nailed to the railing, was a small brass plaque. It read, For Mary and Daniel, love doesn't end. It begins again every time you remember. I reached out and traced the words with my fingers, my eyes filling once more. Daniel placed his hand over mine. He must have built this before he got sick, he said quietly. It's like he knew this day would come. I nodded, unable to speak. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft gold and pink. The water reflected every color, every flicker of light. For a moment, everything felt still, not empty, not lost, but full. We stood there together, the past and present finally meeting in one perfect, fragile breath of morning. Daniel looked at me and smiled. You know, Mom, I think this is what he meant by forgiveness. I smiled back, my heart swelling with both sorrow and peace. I think you're right. We stayed there until the sunlight touched our faces. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt whole, not because the pain had vanished, but because I had learned to live alongside it. As we turned to leave, I looked back one last time at the lake, the dock, the plaque gleaming in the light. Michael's words echoed softly in my mind, love doesn't end. It changes shape. And standing there beside my son, I finally understood what he meant. Some stories don't have endings. They simply find new beginnings in the quiet moments, in the laughter shared, in the memories we choose to keep alive. That day, I didn't just say goodbye to the past. I said hello to life again.